Okay, question. Does anyone know what this is? Right? One person knows what this is. No one in my family ought to be putting up their hand because this is the manual for our air conditioner. And I say that because no one in my family has ever read this thing. No one even knows that this thing existed. This is the manual for our air conditioner. Now, our air conditioner was installed in 2013. And we'd had air conditioners before. We knew how air conditioners work. Who needs to read the manual, right? So the air conditioner was installed. We got the remote control. We worked out the remote control and we had this thing sussed. We could make the room hot and cold. We could make the thing on the front go up and down. We could make the fan go fast or go slow. And our air conditioner is great. House is hot and house is cold. And then in the summer of 2023, so 10 years after the air conditioner was installed, all of a sudden the house wasn't getting cool the same way that it was in previous summers. And we thought, man, 10 years the air conditioner's died. These things happen, right? So you call the air conditioner servicer guy, and he comes out and he charges you a big pile of money, but he comes out, and I'm not exaggerating. He comes out, he opens the front of the air conditioner. Who even knew that was a thing, right? He just pops the front of the air conditioner open, and 35 seconds he's been in my house, and he says, the filters on your air conditioner need to be cleaned, right? There's filters inside the air conditioner. Who knew that, right? Well, I'll tell you who knew that. The person who read the instruction manual, they knew that. Because if you get to page 19 of the instruction manual after don't take the plastic off and don't electrocute yourself stuff, there's a page that says maintenance. And on the maintenance page it says this. It says, clean the product regularly to maintain optimal performance and prevent possible breakdown. Who knew that? If you turn the page, there's pictures of exactly what you have to do to service the air conditioner. You can do it yourself. You don't have to pay $325 for the service guy to come out and do it for you. We would have known that in my house had we read the instruction manual, but we never read the instruction manual. Here's the point, me talking about our air conditioner. We thought that we knew how to work an air conditioner because we're smart people and the air conditioner is a bit intuitive and we can work this out on ourselves. We knew how to make the house go hot and cold. We were in charge of the air conditioner. It was our air conditioner, right? We knew what to do with the air conditioner. And we never stopped to ask this question. We never stopped to ask, what does the manufacturer say about the air conditioner? And that's the question we're going to be asking ourselves today. Spoiler alert, this is where our small group discussion is today. We're going to be asking ourselves, what does the manufacturer say? Now, this is not just me, right? This is you too, because everyone knows there's only three types of people in the world when it comes to instruction manuals, right? There are those people who actually read the instruction manuals before they start anything. Hands up if you're those people, right? There's two people, and even those people, you're actually lying, right? No one really does that. You like to think you do that, right? But no, there's those people. There are people out there who actually read the instruction manual before they start. Then there's other people who don't read the instruction manual, but they keep the instruction manual just in case. Who's with me? I'm one of those people. I think that's how most of us live. You'd like to think you'll keep it on a rainy day. You don't need to read it before you start, but it's there. And then there's those people who just throw out the instruction manual with the box at the rest of it. Anyone like that? Anyone who's like, there's not an instruction manual for anything in your house because it all gets chucked, right? No one admits, but there are some of you like that, right? Here's the truth. Here's the truth, not about air conditioners. Here's the truth about you and me. Many of us treat life like my family treat our air conditioner. No, serious. We think we know how to make life work. We think we can work it out on our own. We think we're smart enough and clever enough, and we've seen this thing before, and we've got enough people around us to ask ourselves, to give us the advice that we need. And we're we're able to do life on our own. We can sort this out on our own. And we never need to ask ourselves, what does the manufacturer say? And we live life like that. And today we're going to be asking ourselves, when it comes to your life and my life, what does the manufacturer say? So we're in the middle, maybe we're not even in the middle, we're in the first part of our journey through the Gospel of Luke. It's a biography about Jesus written by a guy called Luke. We're in chapter 6, verse 17. I'd encourage you, as I'm doing all this, follow along in your Bible. If you don't have a Bible, there are free Bibles at the end of your row and on the table at the back of the room. A lot of people, you're allowed to use your phones. A lot of us, we kind of follow through the Bible on our phones, use the YouVersion app or something similar. The scripture will be on the screen behind me. But we're going to begin where we left off last week in chapter 6, verse 17. Begins like this. A large crowd of his disciples, Jesus' disciples, was there, and a great number of people from all over Judea, from Jerusalem, and from the coastal regions around Tyre and Sidon. And so when you read, when it says Judea and Jerusalem and coastal regions around Tyre and Sidon, it would be like us saying where we live, it would be like us saying people from all over South Australia, people from Adelaide, people from as far away as the southeast and places around Mount Gambier. In other words, it's a way of saying people from all over, people from everywhere had come to listen to Jesus, to follow Jesus, and to get involved in this whole Jesus thing that was starting to happen around the region. Now, Luke spent 5 chapters, the first 5 chapters, introducing you to Jesus. He's gone through all this ancient prophecy, hundreds, thousands of year-old prophecy about God's chosen one who will come. He's talked about his birth, his baptism. He's given you a bunch of stories designed to show you who Jesus was and what he was all about. Last week we met Jesus' team, the people he would have around them. And now in Luke chapter 6, Luke's going to introduce you to Jesus' core message. Right, the core teaching, the things that Jesus was saying. We've heard a lot about who Jesus is and why he came, and now Luke's going to sort of shift and he's going to start talking to you about what Jesus came to say. Begins like this in verse 20. Looking at his disciples, Jesus said, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed or blessed are you who hunger now, for you will be satisfied. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh. Blessed are you when people hate you, when they exclude you, when they insult you and reject your name as evil because of the Son of Man. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, because great is your reward in heaven. For that is how their ancestors treated the prophets." When Jesus says blessed or blessed, it's a way of saying like life is good. Right? Blessed means life is good. So Jesus is saying, he's talking about life in his world. He often says in his kingdom. He says life in my world. He says life will be good for the poor. Now, in his world, the poor, they were people without money, without houses, without cars, what we might call the homeless. And he says life will be good for the poor, for the homeless, because Jesus has a new kingdom for you to live in. He says life will be good for the hungry. Jesus has got a new kind of food that will satisfy you, that will satisfy your hunger in a deeper way than you ever thought possible. He says life will be good for those who weep. He's talking about for those who are in the middle of some sort of emotional pain. He'll say life will be good for you in those seasons of life, because Jesus will give you a new kind of joy. A kind of deeper, more lasting joy. Life will be good when people hate you and exclude you and reject you because of Jesus. He says it's always been that way when people follow God. It's always been that way when people follow God instead of following the world around us. And then listen to the contrast. He says in verse 24, he says, but woe to you who are rich, for you've already received your comfort. Woe to you who are well fed now, for you will go hungry. Woe to you who laugh now, for you will mourn and weep. Woe to you when everyone speaks well of you, for that's how their ancestor treated the false prophets. Now, we don't use the word woe very much, but in this context, in the Bible context, woe means it's an expression of grief or of sadness. That kind of deep or grief or sadness, the sort of feeling that you have when someone tells you that someone you love has died. And Jesus is saying how sad it will be. How sad it is for the rich. Because rich people, they think they already have everything they need. They've already got everything they need, and they don't see any need for God in their life. Their focus is on everything they have. Their focus is on everything they have in the world around them. They're missing out. They're missing out on the world in the kingdom of God. They're missing out on the goodness that God has for them because the rich just get focused on the world around them. He says, how sad it is for those of you who are well fed, those of you who are full of food and don't realize that there's a deep hunger inside you, a spiritual kind of hunger that all the food in the world can never truly satisfy. He says, how sad it is when the world around you thinks you're great. Because if the world around you thinks you're great, it means you must be living and doing and saying the things that they want to hear. Almost certainly means that you're not standing up for the things of God in the world around you. He says, how sad that would be to live that way. Jesus is showing people how the world works in his world, how the world is supposed to work, how he designed the world to work. And he says it is so different from the way the world actually works. He says, my world is so different from the world that you actually live in. He goes on to say in verse 27, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those. Make the world good for those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. In verse 32, he says, if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners, even the bad people of the world, they love the people who love them, right? In verse 37, he talks about judgment and forgiveness. He says, don't judge and you won't be judged. Don't condemn and you won't be condemned. Forgive and you will be forgiven. In verse 38, he talks about giving and generosity. He says, give and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down and shaken together and running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you used, it will be measured to you. Jesus says, you want to know what generosity and what giving and what kindness, what generosity looks like in my kingdom? He says, well, you know what it's like when you go to buy grain? Now, we don't know this, but they knew this. He says, you know what it's like when you go to buy grain? You take your basket down there and the guy just pours the grain into your basket up to the top and he charges you and you leave. He says, God's generosity, God's the kind of guy who when he pours the grain into your basket, he then presses down the grain, right? Really scrunches it into the basket so that he can pour some more into the basket. And after he's pressed the grain into your basket, well, then he gets the basket and he gives it a really good shake so the grain really settles down even more into the basket so he can pour even more into your basket. He's going to charge you the same price for the basket, right? He's going to pour even more into your basket. And after that, he's going to do that thing sometimes that you do when you've got so much. He's going to ask you to take your tunic, the long thing that you wear, and you fold it up and you tuck it into your belt to create like a pouch in your lap, because he's going to give you so much grain you're not even going to be able to fit it into the basket, and you're going to need to create a pouch so that he's kind of pulled into your lap. That's the kind of generosity of God, right? He says, imagine that's how generous God is to you. He says, well, you be that kind of generous to the world around you. Jesus is teaching you how life really works. Jesus is teaching you what life is supposed to look like. He's teaching you what your best life looks like. He's teaching you what your life could look like, how good your life could look with God. And it's very different from what other voices in the world are teaching you your life could look like. In verse 39, he says, he also told them this parable. He says, can the blind lead the blind? Will they not both fall into a pit? The student's not above the teacher, but everyone who's fully trained will be like their teacher. This is Jesus saying, hey, in life, be careful who you follow. Be careful who you're listening to in life. He says, if you're following people in the world around you, it's like the blind following the blind. You're following someone and they don't know which way they're going. If the blind lead the blind, then you both end up falling into a pit. Jesus says, be careful who you follow. Be careful who you let be a teacher in your life. He says, because if you're a student to the teacher, well, you're not going to be greater than the teacher, but you're going to grow into the teacher, right? The student is following the teacher. Whoever you let be a teacher in your life, you are becoming like that person. This is Jesus saying, think about who you're listening to in life. Think about who you're following. Think about who you're being trained by, because you are becoming that person. You are becoming those people in your life. Verse 41, he says, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your friend's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? I mean, how can you say to your friend, hey friend, let me take the speck out of your eye, when you fail to see the plank in your own eye? So you hypocrite, first take the plank out of your eye, and then you will clearly see to remove the speck from your friend's eye. This is Jesus saying, guys, it is so easy to look at people in the world around you, to look at them and to say they've got no idea how to live life. Like they don't know what a good life looks like. I know what a good life looks like, right? Look at them. They're not living the good life. It's so easy to judge, right? He's already talked about judging. It's so easy to look at others and say, man, their life is not headed in the right direction. I know the right direction and their life is not headed in the right direction. But here's the point that Jesus is trying to make. He's saying, if you're not following Jesus' teaching and direction for life, stuff that he's just unpacked in verse 27 through 38, he's saying, if you're not living that way, actually, you're just as blind as the person that you're talking about. Right? You're looking at them going, look at this, they've got a speck in their eye, means they can't really see where they're going. But dude, like there's a plank in your eye, you can't see where you're going either. You judge other people thinking that you know what a good life looks like. But this is Jesus saying the only people who can see where they're going, the only people who know what a good life looks like are people who are following my teaching. Everything else you follow is the blind leading the blind. Everything else you follow is you following someone and they don't really know where they're going either. Now, this isn't my opinion, right? This isn't me saying what you should do. This is what Jesus is saying, right? In the end, he said, each tree is recognised by its own fruit. People do not pick figs from thorn bushes or grapes from briars. He's saying you can recognise a good life. You can recognise a life that's on the right track by the fruit, the outcomes that it's producing. It's pretty obvious, just like you plant anything. You don't get godly fruit from an ungodly life. He says a good person brings good things out of the good stored up in their heart. Key word here, in their heart. And the evil person brings evil things out of the evil stored up in their heart. This is Jesus saying, whatever's inside you will eventually come out of you. Whether it's good or whether it's evil, what's inside you, the real you, will always eventually come out. In verse 46, he finishes his teaching by saying, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? Some of you heard me say this before, but Lord is not Jesus' name, right? Lord is a title. It literally means like boss or master. Lots of people in that day and age would call other people Lord. An employee would call their boss Lord. A slave would call their master Lord. He's saying, why do you call me Lord? Why do you call me boss if you're not going to do what I tell you to do? That doesn't make sense, right? He says, as for everyone who comes to me and hears my word and puts them into practice, I'll tell you what they're like. They are like a man building a house who dug down deep and laid the foundation on rock. When a flood came, the torrent struck, the water flooded in, and that house the torrent struck that house but could not shake it because it was well built. But the one who hears my words and does not put them into practice is like a man who built his house on the ground without a foundation. The moment the torrent struck that house, it collapsed and its destruction was complete. This is Jesus saying, my intention here is to try and help you build a strong, solid, great life. Right? I'm being as clear as I can, says Jesus, and giving you real specific instruction on how you can build a strong, stable, solid, fantastic life. But some of you are not going to follow my instructions, he says. Some of you will hear this and you won't do it. I mean, some of you will hear this today. Some of us will hear this today and we won't do this stuff. He says, that's like building your house on a poor foundation. You can build a great house on a poor foundation. It can look fantastic. It can be a beautiful home, but when the storms come, when the torrent, when the floodwaters come and they wash the ground away, they wash the ground away from under that house, if there's no real solid foundation, that beautiful house that you built, it's just going to wash away, be totally destroyed. And he says, if you build your house on the wrong foundation, if you build the house of your life on a foundation that is anything other than what I'm teaching you is the way to live a life, you're building something that isn't going to stand when the storms come your way. Luke says this is Jesus' core message. This is Jesus' core teaching about how his followers, how we should live life. Now, most Bible experts think that what we've just read, this is not a once-off message that Jesus taught. This is not a once-off occurrence. Most Bible experts believe that what we've just read is a core message that Jesus taught and retaught wherever he went. That's why his disciples knew the teaching, right? Because they heard a version of it in this town and then they went to another town and they heard the same version. And if you're a person who reads a lot of your Bible, you probably read a lot of that and went, I think I've read a lot of that in Matthew when I read Matthew. And it's because you have. It's called the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, 6 and 7. It's 3 chapters in Matthew. You can read that when you get home, make a note of that. A lot of the same words, and actually in Matthew 5 through 7, it starts almost exactly the same with a whole bunch of blessed be these people, and it finishes exactly the same with that same story, almost word for word, that same story about the house the house on the rock, and in Matthew it's a house on sand. Here it's a house without foundation. It's almost the same stories. And if you read Mark and John, you'll find similar stories and some of the similar words there, because this was Jesus' core message that he repeated wherever he went. Whatever town you were in, wherever you heard Jesus, you heard a version of this teaching, because this was Jesus' core teaching that he repeated wherever he went. Now, I don't know if you picked this up, but the way Luke tells this story, the way Luke packages this together, he's actually trying to do two slightly separate things. I don't know if you noticed this, but Luke is telling you the message, but Luke is also trying to tell you something about the messenger. Did you notice that? Luke is telling you something about the message, about what Jesus is saying, but he's also trying to tell you something about the messenger, about Jesus himself. And it's this second point that I want us to talk a bit about today, about the messenger. Because Luke is trying to make the point here that Jesus is not just another influencer giving you his perspective on life. Luke spent 5 chapters, literally everything that he's written up till this point. He spent 5 chapters trying to convince you in a million different ways that Jesus is God's chosen one. That Jesus actually literally God himself come to earth in a human form. Jesus was there at the moment when the world was created. Jesus spoke the world into existence. Jesus was there actually at the moment when you were created. Jesus spoke you into existence. And so when Jesus is giving you his tips and tricks and teaching for life, this isn't just another person giving you their ideas and their thoughts for life. Jesus' words are the manufacturer's instructions, right? Luke's trying to tell you something about who Jesus is. Now, all of us, and I'm talking today all of us read books and we listen to podcasts and we follow influencers on social and we watch people on TV. All of us have voices in our lives who are telling us the best way to live life. And the reality is, even if you're a person who sits here today and says, well, I don't read books, or even if you're a person who sits here and says, I don't really listen to podcasts, or I don't do any of that stuff, we all have voices in our life that are telling us what a great life looks like. Maybe it's your family or your friends or your parents. We all have voices in our life telling us what a great life looks like. And if I asked each of us, if we had time, I could ask each of us to come up and stand here and give us your 3 tips for a great life. If I said, what are the 3 most important things in life for anyone to live a great life? All of us could come up here and would have something to say, right? And all of us would say something probably quite different. I mean, someone would stand up here and they would start talking about health. They would start talking about diet and exercise and stuff like that. And they would say, look, if you're not healthy, if you don't get that stuff right in your life, nothing else is going to matter anyway, right? So you've really got to do that. And someone else, you might be the person who might stand up here and say, look, it's really all about family and relationships. You know, that's really the key to a great life. If you get the right people, if you get the right relationships and community around you, then everything else will make sense and will work. Someone might stand up here and talk about work. And they might say, you know what, it's really important to do something you love. It's really important to find something you love and to do that well, because after all, we spend more than half of our adult life at work, right? So it's fine to talk about health and relationships and stuff, but if your work sucks, if you're not happy at work, it's hard to live a good life if you're not fulfilled in that work kind of space, right? And someone else might stand up here and they might say, guys, you've got to get the financial part of your life right. I'm not saying life's all about money, they might say, but let's be honest. It's hard to live a good life if you are constantly stressed about not having enough money. And other people, there might be people who might stand up here and talk about like gardening or music or dance or painting or something else, and they might say, you know what, the beauty, some of that sort of stuff is really the key to living a great life. Don't get sucked into all this optimization stuff about health and money and whatever. You know, the beauty of life, that's key to you living a great life. And the truth of us, the truth of it is, and I'm not trying to make anyone, I'm not trying to sort of be judgy on anyone here, but lots of us see Jesus as just another wise voice in a life full of wise voices. Lots of us would be like, well, I listen to Michael Mosley. He's the guy I listen to when it comes to health. Susan David, she's the voice that I listen to when it comes to relationships in my life. And Ramit Sethi, he's my financial guru. He's the guy that I trust when I want money advice. And Gardening Australia, that's the place that I go. They're my gardening guru, right? Costa, he's your guy, right? You know, I listen to Cal Newport when it comes to work and productivity and that part of my life. And you know, Jesus, he's the guy I go to for spiritual things. I'm going to take a bit of this and a bit of that. I've got all of these expert voices in my life, and I'm going to take the best of all of them, and I'm going to sort of mash them together into my best life. A little bit of this and a little bit of that guy. I'm going to read this. I'm going to listen to that person. I'm going to watch that on YouTube. And the best of all of that will come together to be my best life. And the world around you is going to tell you that is a fantastic way to live life. That's actually a really wise and a really smart way to live your life. You know, dig into all the expertise you can, read all the stuff you can, get all the wisdom you can, get lots of advice, take the best bits from all of that and mash it together into your best life. Because after all, who's the best person to decide what your best life looks like? It's you. Right? So you take it all and your best life won't look like your best life and your best life won't look like your best life. Each of us, it's our responsibility to take the best of the wisdom in the world around us and to mash it together for you to create your best life. You decide what's best for you. You put it together. The architect of your life, the designer of your best life is you. You hear that message in one way or another. I don't know if you realise this. You hear that message in one way or another every single day. And Jesus says that living like that is building your life on a poor foundation. Your life, a life built like that, you architect your best life like that, Jesus says, your life might look good, might look fantastic for a while, but eventually a storm will come. Maybe not the first storm, maybe your house will survive the first storm, but another storm and another storm, and eventually a storm will come that your house will not withstand and the whole thing will fall down. Jesus says if you want to live a life, if you want to build a life, if you want to find a life, create a life that will stay standing through whatever the world throws at you, you need to follow the manufacturer's instructions. You need to listen to the only voice that created you. You need to listen to the only voice that will never change. The only voice that has never changed, that will never change, and that will stay the same forever. He says you need to build your life. He talks about a rock-solid foundation that won't shift, that won't move, that won't change. Because you know this, right? And I know this. all the experts you listen to, all the books you read and all the podcasts you listen to and all the YouTubers you follow, right? They change their mind all the time, right? No, seriously. The book that I read 10 years ago that I would have told you this is the best book, you've got to read that. I don't even know where that book is anymore, right? It's not even in my top 15. The podcast that you listen to today and you say, this thing is fantastic, and you want to share it with all your friends and say, dude, you've got to listen to this podcast. In a month, you won't be recommending that podcast to anyone because there'll be another podcast. There'll be someone else with something better to say. The influencer that you follow today, they will have changed their mind tomorrow and you'll be listening to a different influencer, or you'll be listening to the same influencer telling you something different. I want you to listen to this. Jesus never changes his mind. Sometimes you'll hear people say Jesus is the same yesterday, the same and forever. The advice that Jesus was doling out 2,000 years ago is exactly the same as the advice that he's giving you for your best life today. And if you somehow happen to live another 2,000 years, I don't think I want to, but if you somehow find the secret to live another 2,000 years, Jesus will be giving the same advice then. Jesus' core message never changes because he's the only one whose core message is absolutely true, forever true. Friends, build your life on Jesus is the message Luke wants you to hear from today.